right, Steve Buchenroth back here with you. And what we're going to do next is try to explain induced drag. And all of us have been student pilots, and many of you out there are becoming instructors or are instructors. And oftentimes a student might say, what is induced drag? And the typical answer is, well, it's a byproduct of lift. Well, as flight instructors, we've got to be able to do a better job than that. We've got to be able to explain what induced drag really is. So let's take a look at it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a wing out here. Okay, let's say we've got a basic airplane wing. It's not the best wing, but as flight instructors, we've got to draw something reasonable. People know what we're doing at least. So let's say this wing is flying through the air, and we're going to draw relative wind. So let's say the relative wind is going directly to this wing, and we're going to draw the relative wind penetrating the leading edge. And the reasons, we just kind of draw the lift vector into that as well. So this is a relative wind, and then what we've got here, of course, would be your lift vector, lift initial. There's your lift vector. So relative wind hitting the wing, drawing it inside the wing just for the visual part of it. Could just keep the relative wind here. But we know now that lift acts perpendicular to relative wind. But now let's take a streamline of air, how it would flow around the wing. So this streamline of air comes through here, goes up over the wing, stays pretty tightly connected to the wing, and of course comes on down, gets pushed off the back of the wing, and it's that airflow going over the wing like that that causes both Bernoulli, because it's going faster, and it causes equal and opposite reaction lift because it's coming off the back of the wing. The wing is pushing the air aft and down. The air is pushing the wing forward and up. And now we'll draw another streamline of air. It comes in, goes around this wing, stays laminar to the wing, caught up in this airflow, comes down with it. So there's two lifts demonstrated, Bernoulli, equal and opposite reaction. And now we've got our lift vector. We could call this lift initial if we wanted to. It doesn't matter, lift one, lift initial. But now we've got to think about the fact that the relative wind was coming in, but once it went over the wing and followed the wing down, it changed direction. So we're going to use a different color on this wind. We're going to say, well, now this airflow, it got caught up right here. Right here it was going up over the wing. Here it's pretty much parallel the wing. Now it's going a complete different direction down like that. So we want to go ahead and depict the change in the relative wind. So using a green marker, we can see that we probably come up with some new average relative wind that may be something like this. Well, lift acts 90 degrees to that relative wind, so it now is going to be bent up like, say, maybe this. So what we've got here, the airflow changed the direction, so the new relative wind is more like this. Remember, the original relative wind was like this. Well, because the relative wind changed direction, the lift acting 90 degrees to it also changed direction. But if I keep it the same length, which is what's going to happen, notice because it got bent back, it doesn't quite reach the same altitude, does it? The same level. So here was our original height of our original lift vector. Now this is the height of our lift vector after it's been bent down. So you can see that we've lost some lift. We can see we've lost lift from here to here. We've lost some lift in this. But the lift is bent back. We've lost lift and the lift is bent back. So we now have an aft component of lift. So this aft component of lift we call induced drag. So the aft component of lift is induced drag. We'll put DI right there. Because that lift vector was straight, now it's bent back, it has an aft component. So the aft component of lift is induced drag. The vertical component of lift is still lift. But now something happens in this airplane. The slower I go, the higher the angle of attack. And the higher the angle of attack, the greater wingtip vortices. So let's kind of draw this over here. If I've got an airplane that's heavy, if it's clean, or if it's slow, each one of those yields a higher angle of attack. So the AOA increases, angle of attack increases. So a lot of times people are like, I don't understand why the AOA would increase. Well, let's take a quick look at that. So let's say that lift is equal to 1/2 times the air density times the velocity squared times the surface area of the wing times C sub L, coefficient of lift. But we're going to replace that coefficient of lift with one part of it so we can see that clearly, just angle of attack. So if I want to hold my lift the same, I'll just put it in red so you can see what I'm doing. If I want this lift to stay the same while I'm slowing down, and if I'm slowing down, velocity is going down. Well, basic 8th grade algebra, something has to come up. And what came up was angle of attack. So you can go through and do that for slow, for clean, and heavy. You can go through and look at that same thought process for slow, clean, heavy. Every one of those yields a higher angle of attack. Now, because there's a higher angle of attack, let's take a look at an airplane. We'll say this airplane is flying into the screen. And we know that this airplane has a lower pressure on the top of the wing. We learned that earlier. And a higher pressure on the bottom of the wing. So the air from the bottom of the wing is trying everything it can to get to the top of the wing. So off the end of the wings, we have our wingtip vortice coming over the top. If we look at our pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge, we can see them. They've thrown dye in behind this crop duster here, and you can see how that wingtip vortice is happening with the airflow behind it. So that wingtip vortice that we're taking a look at right there, well, as the pressure difference between here and here, the lower wing, the upper wing and the lower wing, as that pressure difference grows, well, we get a larger wingtip vortice. It's much bigger and more powerful. So now, with a bigger pressure difference, you have a bigger wingtip vortice. Today's airplanes are trying to modify that and stop that by putting out here on the end of the wing, putting a winglet on the end of the wing. That's to help block that vortice. Now, it's the vortice then that causes us so much more drag. You see, we've got this element of induced drag here that occurred, more of a straight and level flying bit of drag. But this wingtip vortice now comes up over this tip. And when it does that, it drives this good downwash. It drives it down. So what we end up with now is downwash that's clear down here because it's been driven down by the wingtip vortice. So now we end up with even another different, what we've got is a different yet. I'll try to find you a color here to go through this. We've got a different color now to indicate the new relative wind. So the relative wind has changed again. it's now more like this. So as that relative wind looks like that, well, at the 90-degree point, it's now coming back like this. So the induced drag vector just continues to grow. And we've shortened our lift vector again because we've bent it back. So again, we lost another bit of lift from that spot to this spot. All right, we've talked about induced drag. We've explained what happens as we continue to increase our angle of attack. We get a larger and larger vortice. So now let's imagine ourselves getting ready to land. As we get ready to land, we're getting closer and closer to the ground, and the wingtip vortice is now no longer making its way around and pushing down so far, but it's starting to hit the ground. And as it hits the ground, what's going on is we're no longer bending that downwash down. So if we're not bending the downwash down, the relative wind isn't angled back as far. So it's the lift vector that's 90 degrees to the relative wind is now more straight up and down. So when we get within the ground effect, as we call it, the lift vector is not bent back nearly as far. It's more vertical. Hence we have more lift in ground effect, yet we have less induced drag. So more lift, less induced drag once we're in ground effect. And this occurs not only when we're landing, but right as we're getting ready to take off, like if we were holding our altitude during a soft field takeoff. Now, a couple things to remember on this. This is data from the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. At one wingspan above the ground, we've only reduced induced drag 1%. That's all. But if we get to 1/4 of a wingspan above the ground, we've reduced induced drag by 25%. But if you have the ability to when you're taking off in a soft field, to get 1/10 of a wingspan above the ground, we've reduced induced drag by 50%, roughly 50%. These are round numbers. One wingspan, 1%, and all the way to 1/10 of a wingspan, roughly 50%. Thanks a lot. Hope that helps.